Here's a quick overview of the installation. This gives you plenty of room for headers or whatever engine you happen to want to run. Get it in there as straight as you can. Let's go ahead and dive into installing this firewall mounted brake booster master cylinder assembly. Let's go through the box. This is what you're going to receive. You've got your basic pedal hanger bracket. If you're an earlier truck, then you're going to have a different looking one. You got a little firewall mount. You got your master cylinder booster assembly. What else? Got a gigantic bag. Then you've got your threaded rod assembly. It goes to your brake pedal. And in this cute little box here, you have a brake proportioning valve with the little brackets and stuff you need to mount it to the booster. So you might be wondering why we would go through the trouble of drilling holes in the firewall and mounting a firewall mounted brake booster assembly. The factory master cylinder mounts under the floor to the frame rail right here, basically up against the frame rail. And the pedal comes up through the floor right here through this hole that we've already welded up. And it mounts on a rod. To put fluid in it, you got to get down in here, undo this cap, and pour it all over the place, usually all over the ground underneath the truck. That's quite a pain in the butt. So they give measurements with the kit of exactly where this goes, but basically with this bracket, if you're using it, it's pretty self-explanatory. There's only one way that it can fit because it crosses that there and that there. So that's where it's going to be. Now, one thing that the kit says is gives you measurements to come from there to there, find your center from that seam, which is kind of vague. I mean, where does it mean? This. Anyways, so to me, the safe way is to put your bracket on there, kind of get it centered where it needs to be. Double check that measurement with the measurements that you can look up online, but pretty self-explanatory. You've only got a little bit of wiggle room. So what I'm going to do is find perfect center of this, which is pretty close to where that plus sign is right there. It's kind of a dead line or a dead center mark. So I'm going to make sure that that is in fact the center of this bracket, because this is going to determine my bolt spacing and I don't want this hole off center. So I'm going to find perfect center there and get a 2-inch hole saw and punch a hole out, and I'll bring you right back after that. Alright, so I found the center of my hole, and it happened to be dead center where my mark was. So I always drill a smaller pilot bit before switching up to the 1/4-inch hole saw bit, because they can kind of wander a little bit. So I start it with a little bit smaller one, and then I always drill the hole out with the hole saw bit off, just so you don't slip in there and dig in and bend your bit. It's my biggest complaint with hole saws is they break teeth, they get off center. If your bit's bent, they drill wobbly holes. It's just not my favorite tool, but it's definitely going to be what everybody else is using. All right, and we'll put the hole saw on. You're going to want eye protection and hearing protection for this. And until you saw through this stepped part, go slowly. And this is a 2-inch hole saw. Use light pressure. See, it poked through that first one. If you use light pressure or set the clutch, it'll clutch out instead of grabbing and bending stuff. And don't touch that, it's hot. Next step is going to be to take a round file the inside of this and the outside, make sure there's no burrs. Next step is to get your bracket on here. Like I said, I took a little bit of this bend out. It's roughly a 45 degree. Just kind of, it allowed the hole to slide over enough to be centered on that a little better. Not necessary probably, but just what I chose to do. Now what we've got to do is, holding this in place, we got to trace our holes onto the back skin. I primered this section so you can see what I'm doing, and so I could see my holes that I'm trying to mark. Again, that's not necessary either, and this hole looks like it's off-centered, but it's not. It's just your angle. There's probably 3/8 of an inch between these two pieces. So I'm gonna use a brand new Sharpie, hold it as dead center as I can, and just make a circle. Sharpie ain't working very good. Okay. Just don't let your piece slip. Now your holes in your bracket here have a little bit of play in relation to the back plate behind it, the pedal assembly, pedal hanger. So you got a little bit of wiggle room on these holes, but not much. Okay, that looks pretty good. Got my 4 holes. I'm gonna get a small drill bit, probably like a 1/8 inch, drill through the center of each one. Then I'm gonna get a step bit, tornado bit, whatever you wanna call it, and punch them out until I get a good size hole that my master cylinder pedal hanger assembly will go through. Next step is drill your holes. Like I said, this is an 1/8 inch bit. Just try your best to keep them centered. I'm going to do all 4 of these. Not worth watching. Alright, I drilled all my holes out to 1/8 inch. That's not necessarily in the instructions. Now I'm going to use one of these fancy tornado bits, step bits. I always mark where I want to stop. So basically where I put my Sharpie mark, I'll punch the hole in all the way until it gets to right there. And when my Sharpie is all I can see, that's when I stop. Right there. And so on and so forth. When I get done, I go on the inside and just clean out the hole, just barely touch it on the back side. All right, let's have a quick discussion. If you're working on a 47 to 53 model of this truck, this bracket you have is gonna look a little different. It's gonna not have this lower section, and these ears up here are gonna be longer because they mount up to the bottom of the dash. Those are not going to work on a 54, 55 first series. So this is for the 54, 55. See these lower holes here? These 2 are designed to be drilled down here. Now on my truck, well, it's not my truck, but we built this fairing here for an aftermarket steering column, because this truck has the IFS front end and everything on it. So the hole would be down in here. That's obviously not gonna work. So what I'm gonna do, which won't apply to you unless you have a similar setup, is I'm just gonna drill a hole in between these 2 and just have 1 hole down here instead of 2. If you have a stock truck, stock steering column setup, you should be able to use those just fine. So for my next step, I have a handful of bolts. This is just my preference on how to do this. If you have 2 people, this is a lot easier, but I'm just gonna take 4 bolts, 2 initially. I'm gonna go on the interior of the truck, and I'm gonna stuff this through the firewall. with these two bolts coming through the top two. And then when I'm in there, I'm gonna stuff these in there. I'm come back out here and then just run the nuts up snug. Now, I'm not worried about the plate that goes in front of this right now, because all I need to do is mark and drill these holes. Well, in my case, the center one, but you'll be drilling these two. Unless you have a 47 to 53, then these aren't even there. So I'm gonna go in there and stick it in the hole. This is kind of how you got to do it if you only have your own set of hands. Okay, now that it's through there, you can just stick your hand back through there and run these up. Oops. Basically, you want to bolt in each one of the holes so the bracket is as square as you can get it. So I'll stuff these next two in there, I'll snug them down just a little, and then I'll bring you back on the inside to show you how to do the holes. Okay, here we are in the interior of the truck. If you hadn't noticed already, these are the holes you're going to be drilling out. This one and this one. Like I said, I built this fairing out here to go around the steering column. I'm not done yet. Haven't done the inside part, but I have to drill this center hole out, which I made myself. You're going to be drilling this hole and this hole. If you've got a the earlier 47 to 53, then you've got some ears that come up here to the top of this. I can't show you because that's not what we're working on, but this part applies to the 54 and 5. Now I'm using a 3/8 bit with a self-pilot center. It's got that step. It's just my preference. Next step is going to be to remove my temporary nuts, pop that off, clean both sides of the hole in the firewall, and I'm going to shoot some kind of a paint on it. I highly recommend you pull, at least behind this, pull all the sound deadener or matting or anything you've got between that. You need to have this direct to metal. Same for the outside. You don't need to have any kind of a material in there that could potentially loosen up over the years and cause a safety concern. Now what you're going to need to do is get one of your lazy buddies off the couch and get him to come out and help you. What you're going to want to do is hold your bracket up against the firewall. I've got a bolt stuck in mine. I'm doing mine by myself. But you're going to hold this bracket in place and wait till the studs and stuff come through this firewall, and you're going to put your nuts on from the back side. We're going to go out in front and do that first. Now before we stuff this in there, we need to have a real quick discussion about boosters and master cylinders that is not often covered, rarely if ever actually, and that is anything that's got an adjustable two-part rod like this with an adjuster nut in the middle. You need to be careful before you install this that your stud that's in the nut already is threaded in about halfway. Once you get it in there about halfway, run your jam nut up like this. Just kind of just lock it by finger. Reason you do that is because if this is loose and you're not paying attention, both of these shafts are threaded, and you can fairly easily, without realizing it, have this threaded in where one is threaded all the way into here and your other one has just got 2 or 3 threads on it. And obviously, if this pops off, it's going to do this when you hit the brakes. If this somehow wiggles off or shears, it's going to do that. And then you're going to hit the brakes and it's going to go like this. And you're going to crash. So, be careful run your nut in halfway, as close as you can get it to halfway. Lock her down, make a mark on your shaft if you need to with a Sharpie or whatever, so that you don't take a simple process here and turn it into a disaster. It does happen. So she's just setting in there snug on both ends. I know that the shaft is dead center in the middle, and we're okay. So what we're also going to want to do is pull out this cotter pin, which I'm going to have to get my pliers. Oh, no, I'm not. I was going to say my fingers weren't strong enough. This needs to be out of the way. So whoever stuffs this in the firewall is going to make sure that this is as straight as it can get. And the guy inside is going to make sure that the brake pedal arm goes right in between there. So I'm going to go ahead and pop these nuts off, set the plate on, and we'll install it. All right, so as far as initial adjustment on these, my preference is to run it all the way in and stuff it in that way. You just spin that like that. I'm not going to tell you exactly where this needs to be in the stroke, because that can be based on how long the driver's legs are, what accelerator pedal you're running. It all depends on where you want your feet. So that's more based on preference than a hard specific number on where that needs to be. If you have to, you can run this down, keep your nuts on there, figure out where you need, and you can cut some off the end of the stud here. It's whatever you need to do. You shouldn't have to do anything to this part that comes out of the booster. Keep in mind, anytime you cut and modify anything like this, you're voiding a warranty. And I'm not associated currently with any of these companies, so I'm just trying to help people out, you know. So we're gonna need to take this bracket and put it on there, like so. Don't forget it. And I'm gonna stuff it through the firewall, and my imaginary buddy is gonna put these nuts on. Get it in there as straight as you can. You'll have to get in there and kind of pull the boot through the firewall. Now's the part where I wish I had more hands. So I'm gonna hope that this will kind of stay balanced while my imaginary buddy puts nuts on. All right, if you're trying to do this by yourself, a monkey and a football will come to mind. I spared you the entertainment of having to watch me try to do this by myself. Fortunately, the windshield's out, gauges are out, so this is as easy as it could get. Like I said, your final adjustment for where your brake pedal and these rod holes line up is going to be based on the driver. So, I mean, it could be not obviously all the way down, but it's going to be somewhere, you know, in this range, somewhere like this. But I'm not going to tell you, like right here, even with this rod adjusted all the way out, this is way too high. So that's going to be kind of a feel thing, and that's, use your own judgment. Whatever you do, don't cut it too short too fast and not have enough pedal room to apply the brakes fully. Now, one more thing to take into consideration is the thickness of your carpet, your floor mat, whatever it's going to be right here. Don't get your pedal height where, say, it's here is all the way applied, and then you put your pedal on and all that, and then realize that you cut it too short and you can't actually apply full brakes. So give yourself a little wiggle room there. You're better off having, you know, having to have your foot a little higher, or having to trim this down, you know, one more time after you get all your carpet in. So, all right, we're about to put a wrap on this project. Last thing up is the installation of your proportioning valve / distribution block, whatever you feel like you want to call it. You mount it to this plate here with lock washer. I always leave them just snug, just give you just a little bit of play so that you can easily start these fellas. Just get it all locked down tight. Sometimes you can get it in a bind and they don't want to start. This one with the curve goes just like this with the big nut on the top. This one just like this. Now, a 14mm wrench is used to take this nut here off. I'm not going to show you the installation of all the lines down across the chassis and all that. That's just standard GM style brake line routing stuff. This is a temporary mock-up installation for me, so I'm also not going to do a final tighten on all these brake lines. Pointless. I'm just making sure that everything clears the engine, all the wiring and all that sort of stuff. So we're just going to skip that part. You can imagine that I did that. You just snug it. I'm just barely going to put anything on it. Give it a little play. Rotate my lines around. These are obviously loose. Get that one started. Get this one started. I like to get every single one of them started and basically bottomed out before I tighten up this or this. That way you know you don't cross thread any lines, you don't get anything in a bind. It's just good practice. Okay, these are pretty much bottomed out. So we'll go ahead and snug this one up. And I'll imaginary snug these ones up. And that basically puts a wrap on the front of this. You're gonna run into one minor clearance issue on your bottom line here, because it runs right into your inner fender. So the kit comes with a plug, so you can plug it. That's what I would recommend doing. Your other line, you can just put a T somewhere down the line there. And this one here is going to go to your back. So just go ahead and plug your bottom one and you're good to go. Last thing you want to do, if you're running an idiot light in your dash, it shows you that you've lost brake pressure in one side or the other, you'll want to tie this thing into the system. Most hot rods don't have this thing hooked up to anything, but it's not a bad idea. There's a little valve in there that will bounce forwards or back if either the front or back brakes lose brake pressure. It'll get this deal off center and it'll ground this switch or light bulb, is what typically it is. But that's pretty much puts a wrap on the installation of this. It's really pretty easy. Even if you've never done this before, you could probably do this in less than 3 hours. So I've got it done, and this is probably maybe 2 hours, maybe less. So you are going to have to, like I said, get your setup for the brake pedal height. You're going to have to run your brake lines, you know, all around the truck. But the installation of this is very simple, and it's a pretty rigid setup. So this is the way to go, in my opinion. One final part of this project that I can't unfortunately show you right now is the installation of the brake pedal switch. Basically, that triggers your brake lights or shuts off your cruise control or whatever it is that you've got wired into. Now they mount right here. PerformanceOnline.com does sell this part. It mounts here. It's just your typical brake light switch. It has an adjustable thing here where the end of the button touches this. Now, even if I had it, I couldn't show you basically the final adjustment. Basically, the way you do it is after you have your brakes bled, your pedal will be in a resting position up, you know, wherever that happens to be with hydraulic pressure pushing on the back of it. And what you want is that switch to be basically bottomed out, where the second you push that pedal down, the little slider in the end of the switch comes out and it triggers the brake light on. Now you need to have, you know, your wiring and everything hooked up, and test that and adjust it in or out, so that, most importantly, the brake light doesn't stay on, basically, with, you don't have it adjusted right and it's, the switch is uncompressed all the way out, you know, enough where when you park your brake lights are on all the time. You also don't want it to just light your brake lights up just when you breathe on the pedal, or, you know, when you accidentally touch it with your foot. You don't need the brake lights on then either. So that's just a super simple installation. Goes right there. I'll drop a picture in it to show you what the part looks like. Here's a quick overview of the installation. This gives you plenty of room for headers or whatever engine you happen to want to run. It's not a bad looking unit at all. I like it better than the Hydro Boost setups that stick out to like here. Doesn't, you know, doesn't detract so much from your engine bay. Well, hopefully you enjoyed this video and it wasn't too long or too boring. If you liked it, please give me a comment, share, subscribe, hit the bell button. And if you didn't like it, I suppose you can comment on that too.